Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Computer Security Seminar at Purdue University. Today's speaker is Anand Singh. Anand received his master's in computer science here from Purdue, and he is currently the manager of information security for Target Corporation.
Thank you, Joel. Glad to be here. It seems like the odds were stacked against me being here. I started my journey yesterday afternoon in Minneapolis, and I was able to come here just about an hour ago. It took me that long. I braved blizzards and snowstorms and whatnot, and 4 states, and then finally I did arrive here. But I didn't want to miss this chance. It's an honor to be here. Before I dive into the details of my presentation, I wanted to commend CERIAS on the work that they have been doing. I keep a close watch on what goes on in the information security world, part of it via CERIAS website, and it keeps me up to date, it keeps me current, and it keeps me aware of what are the latest vulnerabilities and threats that are expanding out there, and I encourage my employees to do the same, and I know that my peers in other organizations are doing the same, so you guys are doing a good public service, and thank you. My talk today is about information security in organizations. And what I want to focus on today is what are the top information security initiatives in big organizations. And the content of the talk is primarily going to be geared towards business and strategy and a little bit of technology as well. But I know that you guys get plenty of that. I checked out the CERIAS seminar roster, and looks like you guys get a pretty intense technical coverage in your prior seminars. So today I wanted to change the track a little bit, talk a little bit about business, because having been a student here, I know that we get a very good exposure on technology, but sometimes we don't get the benefit of understanding how the learnings that we are doing right now will apply in practical business world. So that's what I'm going to focus on for the most part. I like my talks to be conversational, so if you guys have any questions, I would encourage you to ask them during the talk itself. Of course, we will have some time in the end, so you can ask any questions in the end as well. And I will linger around for a little bit, so you can ask, you can stop by and talk in person as well. So the first big thing that is going on in corporations is information security governance. Now, who can tell me what governance is all about? What does governance mean? I have brought some rewards to entice your participation. So whoever answers correctly, and I will have a lot of questions throughout the presentation, they will get a target dog. So make a guess. There is no harm done.
Some kind of body entity or set of rules that essentially guide general consensus of how one should act in a certain field.
Excellent. And in this context, what governance means is very similar. So what that means is the responsibility of board of directors to ensure that the activities of an organization are designed to meet its objectives, to meet its risk, and to serve the shareholders. That's what governance is all about. And the trend that is happening right now is that information security is becoming a core part of governance within various organizations. It was not so, but it is becoming now. And the big reason is because people are realizing that information is the biggest asset that the organizations have. So I have a cartoon here, and I did not put it here because it is funny, although it is funny. I put it here because if you look at this, what does this tell you? It tells you that information security is becoming a part of common lexicon. Look at the media coverage that we have had, all the breaches. Every week there is a headline in major newspapers about a security breach that has happened. Even cartoonists are drawing cartoons about information security. And what that tells you is that general consumer is becoming much more savvy about information security. So as a consequence of that, any information security breach has a very significant negative brand impact. It leads to loss of consumer confidence. And there are a lot of reactive costs that happened as well, such as litigation, settlement, technology, because you have to be reactive and you can't do your due diligence, and suddenly you have to spend millions of dollars to buy technologies to get it in-house so that you can control the fallout of the security breach. So look at the example of TJ Maxx. No one knows for sure, but they lost somewhere between 50 million and 100 million credit card numbers. They are paying money all over the board. They are paying settlement costs to Visa. They are paying, there is litigation against them in various courts, class action lawsuits and things like that. So corporate boards are becoming more and more aware of the risks of not having proper security due diligence within their organizations. In addition, now there are payment card industry regulations as well that are impacting various organizations. So I'm assuming most of you guys are familiar with SOX already. PCI is the payment card industry regulation. Then HIPAA is pharmacy and patient rights legislation. GLBA, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, protects how the financial information within an organization should be protected. And then OCC that protects that audits any finance organizations to make sure that good practices are in place. So if you look at the statistics of which organizations get attacked and which organizations don't, one thing is very clear. The organizations that have good governance are attacked less often, and the organizations that have poor governance are the ones that get impacted most often. So all of this is leading to a ripple effect in corporate boardrooms. Information security is being deemed so important that corporate boards are asking information security to become a part of corporate risk management. They are demanding timely reporting on information security statistics within organizations, and they are demanding a proper security oversight within organizations. And that has also led to a organizational shift. So now prior to this point of time or over the last few years, not all organizations had dedicated information security departments, but now that is starting to happen. Now almost every board is demanding an independent information security department. One other shift that is happening is that more and more chief security officers are reporting to CEOs directly versus CIOs, which was true in the past, that most CSOs reported to CIOs. Now, what is wrong with that relationship? CSOs reporting to CIOs. Can someone tell me?
The CEO doesn't understand what the guy, what the people need when he doesn't really care about it.
He does care about it, but I think that the implications are different. The implications primarily are that a CSO reporting to a CIO is a conflict of interest relationship, because the objective of CIO is to develop technology to the organization at a fast pace. Whereas if you think about it, a CSO is saying, these are some things that are insecure in this software product. We have to fix it before we implement it. And the CIO is going to say, well, we need to move it fast, so can we make some compromises here? So there is that inherent conflict of interest, and hence the reason why corporate boards are requiring that CSOs report directly to CEOs instead of CIOs. One other shift that is happening is the need for CSOs to align information security with business strategy. And I will talk about this in a little more detail in my next section here, so I'll skip that for now. Corporate boards are also requiring a top-down approach to security. And that top-down approach comes down in the form of policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines. Policies are basically a reflection of what the board thinks are the appropriate objectives, security objectives for the organization. They're very high-level statements. So something to the effect of every data access should be access controlled. That's a policy definition, just an example of that. A standard is a more detailed outline of what that means. So a standard in the example that I gave, for example, would be if it is a tier 1 data, it needs to be access controlled by 2-tier authentication. If it is a tier 2 data, it can be controlled by 1-tier authentication and things like that. Procedures are very detailed technical steps on how this would be accomplished in a specific technology. So for example, how would you achieve that 2-tier authentication in Solaris, for example? And a guideline is just some suggestive ideas about how the implementation should happen. So that top-down approach is very helpful because up to this point, there is a lot of, if it is bottom up, you are being very reactive. There is a problem, you go patch it, but it doesn't get resolved organization-wide. People are not thinking about information security. People are just solving problems that have been identified. But as all of us know, there are many problems that never get identified but still linger. So coming to my next point here, long-term security strategy. A CSO needs to understand what are long-term plans of business. Why is that? I answered that a little bit in my earlier talk, but the reason he needs to understand that is because he needs to align his security objectives with business objectives. He needs to justify that. If I come to you and say, give me $200 because I need it for information security, you guys are not going to give me, right? You guys are going to ask me, why should I? What are you going to do for me? And this is why. It helps justify how information security is supporting the business and becoming successful. It helps a CSO prepare a long-term plan for what information security would look like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. If I know that 10 years down the road I will have a web-based portal, I know that I need to start thinking about it and implementing practices right now to make sure that when my web shopping portal is ready, it is ready in a completely secure fashion. I need to start thinking about it right now. Hence the reason why a CSO needs to understand what the long-term plans of business are. The other, as a part of a strategic, long-term strategic planning, a CSO needs to put a very good risk management process in place. The reason for that is because not all risks can be addressed. And it doesn't make sense to address all risk, because sometimes the amount of dollars that you can put in to fix a risk might be more than the amount of dollars you will lose if someone were to exploit that risk. And you don't want to do that, obviously, right? You don't want to spend more money on doing something that is going to be more expensive than if someone were to breach that, someone were to take advantage of that security loophole. So, and typically risk assessment process, it is based on risk-reward theorem. So this is what risk-reward theorem looks like. Vulnerabilities is not equal to exploits. The fact that a weakness exists does not mean that it will be exploited. A threat needs to exist to exploit that weakness. Similarly, for the same reason, threats is not equal to exploit. If a threat exists but there is no vulnerability, a threat cannot lead to exploitation. Vulnerabilities plus threats is not equal to exploits as well, right? Because there might be a very, very insignificant vulnerability that might take an enormous amount of effort to exploit for a threat. And so they might choose not to do it. So the fact that a vulnerability exists and a threat exists does not mean that an exploitation of that will happen. But vulnerabilities plus threats allow exploits. Other points here are self-explanatory, so I won't spend too much time on that, but we can talk about that if you have questions on that. So what is the biggest security risk in most organizations? That is definitely a risk, but there is something that is even bigger than that. Sorry? Insider, yes, exactly. So not necessarily insider threat, but untrained employees, right? Because most people don't intend to do damage, but damage happens unintentionally anyways, a lot of times. If you look at the data breaches in last 2 years, about 50% of them happened because someone lost a laptop or someone misplaced a tape drive somewhere or something of that nature. And that's a lack of care on the employee's part, lack of a proper due diligence on employee's part. Hence the reason why the biggest bang for the buck is obtained when you have more awareness of security within your organization, both among end users as well as among your technical population. So here is another example. And the regional computer emergency response team in Army, they did purchase and implement a lot of security technology, but they did not see any significant improvements. And reduction of risk was not achieved. Why? Because people were not taking advantage of those technologies appropriately. They were not aware of what more secure behavior was. And when they went ahead and trained their employees on good security practices, they observed dramatic security improvement. So one of the biggest initiatives, one of the biggest pushes right now is to get your average user trained on policies, standards, and procedure, what is acceptable for the organizational behavior. So for example, a good example would be, and I lost my laptop. This happened to me actually in my yesterday's flight and things like that. I misplaced my laptop at the airport. And so one of the first things that you should do is, you should go ahead and report it immediately, right? So that someone can do an assessment on what information was resident on that laptop and what is the consequences of someone getting an entry into my laptop and seeing the data that is out there. In my case, all of that is encrypted, of course. I wouldn't be manager of information security if I left plain text data on my laptop. But that is one of the first things that people should do. So that's an example of why it is important to train end users on policies, standards, and procedures. So phishing, tailgating, other social engineering. Even now, it is amazing. If you go out there and there are actually companies that specialize in doing social engineering. They will go out there, they will test the average user, or for example, they will walk into a store, they will talk to store manager, pretend that they came from corporate and try to gain access. And it's amazing that in some cases they might even become successful. So the training is an answer to questions like these. So this is the end user aspect of things, but there is a technology aspect of things as well. I don't think the dissemination of how to code securely is very prevalent in average developer right now. People don't know what do they need to do to encrypt data appropriately in Java, for example, or .NET C# platform that is gaining prominence right now. And that's the other aspect of training and awareness. You need to teach your technical population and make sure that they understand when they're doing their development, they understand how to develop it in the most secure fashion possible, so that come 2 years down the road, someone is looking for an opportunity to gain an entry, they shouldn't be able to exploit something that was left open in the code because of lack of awareness. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about some of the interesting trends in information security and how that is impacting the technological thinking in different organizations. Volume of data on the web. It was, in 2006, it was 250 billion gigabytes. Can someone make a guess on what it is? What is the projected number for 2010? Make a guess. I'll guide you in the right direction. Throw any number. Up. Higher. Yes, you are pretty close. So in just in the matter of 4 years, the amount of data will quadruple on the web. And what does that mean for security technology? It means a lot of things, but some are plain common sense things. So think about it. What does that mean for security technology?
A lot more to protect.
A lot more to protect, exactly. So, and correspondingly, you have a lot more data to analyze. So now, before you were looking at something that was smaller in number, but if you apply that principle proportionately, the amount of data in organizations will quadruple as well. So now you have a lot more information to analyze. So what that means is where the research opportunities exist right now is in that area, the need for speed. I need to be able to look at the same amount of data in the same amount of time, larger amount of data in the same amount of time that I used to be able to do that. So right now I'm spending, say, 2 seconds for every, or 2 microseconds for every packet that goes out. In future, even though my data has quadrupled, I need to be able to meet the same standard, 2 microseconds for every package that goes out. So anything that introduces efficiency in that analysis, anything that introduces the ability to look at this voluminous amount of data at a very fast pace is going to be a very material impact for the future. The second big thing is correlate and prioritize. So now you have multiple independent pieces of information, and there are too many alerts. And I have to tell you one thing, having worked in corporate environments for a while. Too many alerts are as bad as no alerts, because I don't have people bandwidth to be able to look at all those alerts. So too many alerts are as bad as no alerts. So that's where correlation type of technologies would be really, really helpful. If I have 5 tools, intrusion detection systems, firewalls, virus protection software, things like that, something obviously becomes much more important if it has footprints in all the 3 versus something that is confined to just one. So that ability to correlate, that ability to introduce intelligence into the voluminous amount of data that I have, and that ability to prioritize, that is going to be a lot more value to me versus looking at everything as a mass volume, but it not making any sense to me. Then finally, false positives. This is a problem that is overwhelming right now for most organizations. An intrusion detection systems on an average generates about a 1 million alert for an organization that has 50,000 people. 1 million alerts a week. You can just imagine what that means in terms of being able to analyze that data intelligently. So our ability to filter out false alerts, our ability to discard that is and focus on just what is the relevant data, that is going to be of very increased significant in future. And if you guys do some research and figure out some good ideas about that, come and talk to me about that. I will be the first buyer of that technology. IDS and IPS. So there are 2 common approaches right now in intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. Signature based, where you have a signature, a stamp that you can compare your threats against and verify whether that's indeed a threat or not. And learning based. So learning based systems understand how your environment normally functions, and once they determine that quote unquote normal behavior, anything that is out of bounds of that normal behavior is reported as an alert. What I see happening in future is that the 2 technologies will combine somehow to deal with the problems that I had identified in the previous slides. Voluminous amount of data and introducing some intelligence into the data that gets reported. Another type of technology that is going to be more prevalent in organizations in future is controlling dissemination of information. So we live in a world where 32 gigabytes of data can fit on something really, really small, a USB drive. And the fact is that if you look at the statistics, as I said before, 80% of an organization's assets reside in information. So someone could presumably walk away with a large portion of information within an organization on a drive that is this big. So that protection of intellectual property, that is going to be a big focus. DLP technology will become a more mature discipline. And right now, it is still somewhat immature because, again, a lot of false positives. Because, for example, if you are looking at social security numbers, it will 3 plus 4 plus 3 type of patterns. It will search for that and report that. But there is too many data that matches 3 plus 4 plus 3 type of pattern. So there is an enormous amount of false positives that get reported. So the future trend is going to be that DLP is going to become more mature, and the organizations are going to be dependent more and more on data loss prevention to control the information leaving their organizations. The predicament here really is the same as what music companies are facing right now. Anyone can, no matter what digital rights management people put on their songs, someone is going to figure out an easy algorithm to crack that, and then suddenly it will be on the web and everyone will be exploiting that. So this is a big problem that organizations will struggle against. Fortunately, it's much more controlled for us because everything is happening within organization's environment. So you can control that to some degree. One of the biggest changes that is happening right now is the importance that web-based tools are gaining. So think of Salesforce.com. Before Salesforce.com came into existence, most organizations had custom software built in-house where they manage their Salesforce inputs and statistics. Salesforce.com changed all of that. But because now people can do their transactions on the web, and all of this is managed by a third party. But it introduces a corresponding risk. Now the data is not in my control anymore unless I introduced an appropriate agreement with the company prior to doing that. And that's a big risk. Think about it. I mean, the fact that if you control the data, you can do a lot with it, as I said in my previous point. But if you don't control it, if it is resident in some other third party's server, some other third party's locations, if you did not do good due diligence in making sure that your data will be protected, it's going to look really bad for you if a security breach were to happen. This is a pain point for almost any company that I know of, legacy technologies. What's wrong with Telnet, by the way? What's wrong with usage of Telnet in your software? Anyone? You guys are security students. It's a simple question. Yes?
Telnet is not encrypted.
Exactly. Telnet is unencrypted, our login is unencrypted, RSH is unencrypted, FTP is unencrypted. When you exchange data in an unencrypted format, it's going to be really easy for someone to tap into your network and be able to decipher what your passwords are. And once you have the password, you can footprint the network and introduce a security breach, and then nothing is under control after that. Legacy technologies are very prevalent in organizations. Most of the code, many organizations are using programs that were written in 1980s or even 1970s. And think about whether information security was an important consideration at that point of time. It was not, right? And when people did their coding and their implementation, information security figured nowhere in their requirements. And now we have to deal with the fallout of all of that. So CSOs have to deal with that. CSOs have to put long-term strategies in place on what to do with things like that. So the answer is not always that get rid of technology, right? Because the business has become so used to using these things, using a certain tool, that getting rid of it is probably going to cause a lot of havoc. But if possible solutions reside in the fact that maybe you can introduce an IPsec tunnel to encrypt the data that flows, so that even if someone were to tap into it, either tunnel it or transport it, if someone were to tap into it, then IPsec has kind of taken care of the encryption aspect. So you can introduce some wrappers around these legacy tools to make sure that the data that gets transported is protected. Compliance. Compliance is a huge issue for most organizations. Compliance is very important because it's not optional. You have to do that. You have to take care of making sure that if you want to use, for example, Visa in your business, you have to make sure that you are complying with PCI requirements if you are a level 1 merchant. It's a part of business. You are forced to do those activities, and since you have to do it within a small amount of time or within a certain amount of time, it's a big pain point for most people. I already talked about some of these, so I wouldn't spend too much time on that, but why is it that most organizations are having a tough time complying? The reason for that, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are a lot of risks. There's all sorts of points where it could fail. And so trying to hit all of those at once is really difficult.
That is correct. So compliance is mostly bottom up. So there is little things that you have to do throughout your organization, throughout little parts of your organization that is very difficult to coherently fuse together in a strategy. Anytime you have that fractious response, anytime you have a response that is not driven by a common goal, it is oftentimes going to create more problems because, for example, if you solve your problem in one area with one technology, if the same problem exists in another area, that other area doesn't know about that fact. So they might use a different technology, and suddenly now you have two competing technologies in two parts of your organization solving the same problem, and that's a problem in itself. Other thing is, people sometimes confuse compliance with information security. Compliance is not equal to information security. The fact is that if you have good information security discipline within your organization, compliance is a good side effect. But and hence the reason why I said you have to start top down. You have to think about, you have to start at a governance level. You have to establish what is appropriate for the organization. Once you have established what is appropriate for the organization, and you have trained people to follow what is appropriate for the organization, I think most other problems are taken care of on their own. So data management is another big pain point. Most organizations will have a lot of classified or very important data. They will have social security numbers. They will have credit card numbers. They might have your birth dates, your mother's maiden name even, things of that nature. And when you have that large amount of data and you don't have any classification of that data, it becomes exceedingly difficult to manage all of that data. So one of the big future initiatives for future is going to be to make sure that data gets classified within your organization in appropriate categories. Typically, a 4-level category is what is being encouraged right now. I watched the presentation that Eric Cole gave a few weeks ago, and he said that you can start off with a 2-level type of protection, which works as well. Once you have that understanding built into your organization, it's easy to upgrade. Taking that first step, getting it done for the first time around, that's the biggest problem. So once the benefit of data classification is that once you have done that, you can build appropriate access controls around that. So the most easiest thing to do, the biggest bang for the buck is role-based access controls. So you can say, for example, only people in key management group will have access to social security numbers of the employees. So once you have the roles defined, once you have the classification defined and mapped into your databases, it's very easy to establish those relationships where you can define who gets access to what. Then the final point is about data destruction. So I talked about how we are quadrupling data in four years. Now, data destruction is one small step in that direction. I don't think it is going to solve that problem. But if you don't need any data, something that is not of importance to you, why the need to hang it or keep it around? Most organizations today don't have good data destruction practices in place. And this is another hot research area right now. Doing appropriate on its own, building intelligence into tools such that they can go about and scan your data repositories and destroy data that is not appropriate for you to maintain. If you can do that in an intelligent fashion, you have solved a big business problem. You have helped control this information sprawl to some degree. Wireless and network perimeter security. So this is a more tactical objective versus a strategic objective, but I put it here anyways because this is a pretty significant problem right now. The fact is that most organizations use wireless devices, and all you need is a wireless scanner that you can point in the right direction, and you can tap on what is going on in the airwaves. So if it is unencrypted or not encrypted strongly enough, then you are in big trouble, particularly if it is information of consequence to you. This is how TJ Maxx was exploited. Someone took actually it happened in Minneapolis. Someone took a wireless scanner. They sat outside of the store in parking lot. They pointed their wireless scanner in the direction of the store. They grabbed a bunch of data. It was WPE encrypted. I'm sorry, web encrypted. So it was easy for them to crack, and then suddenly they had knowledge about your entire network infrastructure. And once they had that, everything else is easy. So one of the biggest initiatives for 2008 and beyond is going to be getting rid of WEP and replacing that with WPA, which brings much stronger security encryption mechanisms in place. Network and perimeter security. So there is this fundamental concept of defense in depth, and I'm sure all of you guys understand. It is such a fundamental concept that I'm sure all of you guys understand that already. So multi-layer authentication is one example of defense in depth, where you have to not only authenticate yourself one time, but you also probably have to provide like a physical, such as a retinal scan or your fingerprint reader or something like that, some sort of physical attribute in addition to the password that you were supposed to know. So that's an example of defense in depth. The same concept applies in network as well. So firewall is your first layer of defense. And then besides firewall, inside firewall, then there will be IDS and IPS that will be second layer of defense. And then there will be desktop-based protections such as virus, antivirus scanners and things like that. So that's a defense in depth example. If something were to escape the first layer, possibly it could be caught at second layer or beyond. So the defense in depth is going to be more prevalent in future. The CSOs are thinking about it and trying to make that a requirement for anything new that happens within their organization. Routine penetration tests and vulnerability scans. So this is gaining more and more prominence now. People want to understand, because a lot of things are legacy or have been architected for a while. I don't know if I'm building something new. It's easy for me to address security problems if I'm building something new. But if something exists already, it has existed for 20 years. I don't know what type of vulnerabilities might exist in that. So in that scenario, what makes sense for me to do is hire or get an expert in that area, get an ethical hacker or something like that, get them in-house and have them try to break that system and see whether they were able to do it, and if they were able to do it, maybe fix that proactively rather than be reactive about it. Vendor management. Now, many of you guys might be wondering, what does vendor management have to do with information security? This is why. Most organizations have vendors that they work with very closely, suppliers or non-core functions. So, for example, they might be sending your data to a third-party provider for your health insurance information. They don't manage that in-house. They are sending your data to someone else. So vendor management is going to be a huge area of focus. Any loss of data by a third party to which you send the data is as impactful as if you were to lose that data yourself. It's no different, because I gave my data to my organization. I did not give that to third party. My organization, as the primary receiver of data, has the responsibility to protect that data for me. If they didn't, then there is something wrong with the picture. There is that possibility of loss of reputation and brand damage. So the new push right now is to make information security a part of any vendor management relationship. So ensure that as a part of that agreement, there is compliance with organizational information security standards. Make sure that they are audited by trusted third parties, and there is a reason behind why trusted third parties. The reason is that if you were to do that audit yourself, there might be vested interest in making sure that that organization passes that audit, and that's why many regulation regimes are requiring that you get that audit done by a third party. Review, see if they have any certifications such as ISO 27001. And review those certifications to make sure that all the areas of importance to you were covered. And then on-site reviews for physical security and architectures. So that was my talk, guys. I have one dog left, so I'm going to give that to the best question that gets asked.
You mentioned that you had like IPsec to like protect protocols, but if you implement something like that, you'll be blind. Like if you have a big IDS structure and you put IPsec, you're basically blinding your IDS immediately. So what do you think we should do about that?
That is true, and that's the reason why you probably don't want to use IPsec for outside your organizational communication. It will primarily be within the intranet communication where it makes most sense, either tunneled or transport IPsec. If you have to monitor data that goes outside, then it doesn't make sense to encrypt it with IPsec. I think it makes more sense to encrypt it via SSL certificates in that scenario, via keys in that scenario, because then you can your proxy servers will be able to, since they know the keys, they will be able to look at the data that hides behind those SSL and be able to determine whether that is secure or not. So SSL makes more sense in those scenarios than IPsec for outside the organization communication. Good question. Any other questions?
What is the effect of recession on this whole industry, specifically in your company, if there is a recession? How is it going to affect this part of your...
The good part is that information security is recession proof. I think most organizations realize by now that their biggest asset is information. So sky is the limit, and I say that within quotes, of course. That's not completely true, but if you have a good case, you will always get money. There is no consequence of that. Particularly since it is coming from the board of directors level that you should have good practices in place, the CEO level that you should have good practices in place. Most often, if you can build a good case, if you can justify why you need dollars for a certain technology or a certain process, you will almost always get it. So you guys are studying in a good field right now.
After all the press regarding the TJX breach, what did I'm sure people called you from above the ladder or whatever and said, hey, we don't want to make the headlines next. What were those things that the CEO level or the CTO level were looking down to you to reassure them when they saw competitors making the front page?
I think the first thing that came down to us was to analyze our infrastructure to see if the vulnerabilities of the kind that happened in TJ Maxx existed within our environment. So that was the first reactive step. And then the second step in that direction was not only ensure that what happened in TJ Maxx doesn't happen for us, but also take it a step beyond. And that's where I think a lot of new strategic initiatives for us came from. Take it a step beyond. Think about what could be wrong, what could go wrong versus what has gone wrong in other places, and then try to manage those problems. So those were, and that's where I think this presentation outlined some of the things that we have to start thinking about it now.
Were there any major changes to either policy or your architecture or software that you were using, whether UWPA or you are using WEP or you'd already changed over? Were there things that Target changed in response to what had happened?
I think the biggest change was in the area of awareness. So we made sure that people in stores, that's where the breach happened for TJ Maxx, that people in stores are more cognizant of what security means to an organization. We wanted to ensure that people in headquarters are aware of how they need to implement technology such that it is less prone to breaches in stores. So those were some of the immediate things that we started working on. Then we also started looking at making our proxy environments more smart, of course, because denial of service is another big thing that is gaining prominence right now. A lot of hackers are now demanding ransom money to not do denial of service against you. So that's another thing.
If, as you say, that organizations, their largest asset is information, and in a large organization you have a board of directors whose responsibility is to oversee the operations of the company and to serve in the best interests of the investors, do you think at some point, instead of having a CSO report to a CEO, we're going to see it more where the CSO or somebody involved in audit, for example, would report directly to the board?
That's a good question. It's kind of a mix of both. I don't think CEO is the highest executive in the organization. So I think the reporting relationships are not going to change where the CSO reports directly to the board of directors. But what is going to happen is that the board of directors is going to demand a direct interface with the CSOs. They are going to demand direct reporting from the CSOs. So that the same conflict of interest thing that we talked about, if there is any possibility of that, that gets avoided in this scenario. So audit findings, metrics reporting, things of that nature. So I think that's more likely to be the trend versus CSOs being directly responsible to board of directors.
As a security executive yourself, do you have any recommendations for the students here in terms of if they want to achieve that level, things they should be doing? Should they all go out and get MBAs or study business in depth, or what things would you recommend for students to do if they wanted to pursue that route?
That's the best question so far. So it's very interesting, and I will talk from my own experience. So when I graduated from Purdue, I went to work for Silicon Graphics, designing supercomputers. And as you know, it's very core technology. You don't get a knowledge of business. You are doing things at an algorithmic level. You are doing things at a chip level. You don't understand how the guys in the sales force are selling that. You don't understand what type of requirements are there in the marketplace that you need to satisfy. That was my big blind spot. After I left Silicon Graphics and Cray Research, I went to work for a small company called Parametric Technology Corporation, and that was my interface to the business world. I was still a principal engineer for them, but in that position, I was also responsible for a lot of customer implementations. And that's when I gained real knowledge of the business problems that different organizations deal with. When you talk with a CIO in an organization where primary focus is not technology, you get to understand a little bit about their business. You get to understand the business problems that they face and how can you solve that. So no, you don't necessarily need an MBA to become an executive in information security. But I think what you do absolutely need is a thorough understanding of business aspects of things. I would strongly encourage you to widen your focus beyond technology. Core technology is good for you. It will last you a lifetime. But you need to understand more than that. You need to understand how business functions. You need to understand finances a little bit. You need to understand what are important things for an organization. You need to understand business plans. Once you have that understanding, I think it's easy to play both the roles. And I think you become a much more stronger executive as a result. The reason being that you won't find a lot of very senior executives who understand technology very well. So if you do understand technology very well and you have a good knowledge of business, I think that's an automatic differentiator for you. That takes you a lot farther. If you don't have any additional questions, we can end this talk. I will linger around for a little bit, so if you have any additional questions, feel free to stop by. I left my business cards out here, so if you are interested, you can take one. It has my contact information.